Hey everybody, today we're going to see if we can't build something. Now what I have in mind is we're going to see if we can put together a wooden tripod, a lifting tripod that you can use for all kinds of little projects that you might have anytime you need to pick up something that's too heavy to lift by yourself. Now specifically what I have in mind for the one that I'm building for myself is I'm going to try to use it for gravestones, for lifting and lowering gravestones. Sometimes when we're working, restoring, repairing gravestones, you need to be able to pick something up that's 200, 300, 400 pounds in order to level it, to set it back, to repair it, whatever it might be. So that's what I've got in mind. Now, if you were to browse around through YouTube, or if you were just kind of Google wooden lifting tripod, you'll find all kinds of folks out there that are giving you instructions or showing you videos or whatever about different ways that you can build one of these things. Some of them are very simple, some of them are a little bit more complex. Now, what I've tried to do here today, what I will try to do, what I hope to bring to the game, is that I've looked at a lot of those videos for you already. So I've kind of taken some ideas from here and from there, worked together to kind of come up with an idea that I think is going to make a pretty nifty tripod for whatever purpose you might have to use it for. So hang with me. We're going to start with a piece of plywood. We're going to cut a top. Will kind of be the heart of this thing before we ever get around to putting legs on it or anything else. Hang with me. We'll be right back here in just a minute and we'll get started. Okay, so the most important part of this whole project is the disc that's going to become the top that everything else is going to hang off of on this tripod. So what we want to do is we want to create a disc that's about 11 inches in diameter. We're going to make it out of a sandwich of four separate pieces of 3/8 plywood. In between those pieces of plywood, we're going to put a piece of sheet metal to give it some extra stiffness and strength. So in order to do that, we need to cut out four pretty accurate circles of plywood. And I've tried a couple different ways to do this, and I think this is going to be the best way. All you need for this, by the way, as far as the plywood goes, is a scrap piece, a 1 foot piece that's the full 4 foot width of a sheet of plywood. Will give you what you need, because we're going to be cutting, like I said, about 11-inch diameter discs. So what I've done is I've started a nail here. This is going to be the center of our circle. I'm going to use my Stanley square, quick square, and I'm going to set the pivot point right here of the quick square. It's got a little indentation, sort of a rounded indentation right there. I'm going to set it right up against the roundness of that nail. I'm going to put my pencil at the 5.5 inch mark on the square, and I'm going to begin pushing it around. I'm keeping that pivot point in line with my nail. I'm going to dry the nail a little bit better, so hang on. The test of how well your circle is turned out is how well you come back to the starting point where you began without overlapping one way or the other. So let's take a look at that. That appears to be a pretty darn good circle to me. Now, we just need to make 3 more of those, and once we have them marked, we'll be ready to use a jigsaw to cut them out. Okay, so these got a little wonky a couple places, but in general, I'm pleased. Now, the other important thing about this, the fact that we use that nail to get ourselves the absolute center of each circle, means that I've got a guide that I can go off of when we go to drill the center hole that the hook that is going to hold up our hoist is going to live in. So that's that. Next step's to cut them out. Okay. There is the beginning of our header. We have 4 pieces of plywood cut out that is going to be the heart of our top, the main part of our top. But we want to add a little bit of extra strength to this thing. So we're going to put a piece of sheet metal in between each piece of this sandwich. Now, if you happen to have a buddy that's in the heating and air conditioning business, the odds are you could hit them up for some scrap pieces of duct or something that would do the job. I don't have such a friend, so I ended up going to Menards in this case and buying the cheapest little pieces of sheet metal duct stuff that I could find that would do the trick for me. So this is about 2 feet long. It's about a foot wide, and I have another one. I need 3 discs, which I'm going to cut a little bit smaller than the plywood discs out of these. Before I do anything with them, though, I'm going to snip off the edges. You will note that for this particular part of the exercise, I've got some good strong gloves on because this stuff will cut you without even thinking about it. We did it. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to draw some circles on this that I'm going to cut out, but I want them to be a little bit smaller in circumference than the ones that we did plywood. Okay, so this time what I've done is I've driven the nail right through the piece of sheet metal and into the plywood underneath, just to give me some, make it nice and secure. And whereas I was using a 5.5-inch radius in order to get an 11-inch diameter on my circle, this time I'm drawing the radius at 5 inches, which will give me a 10-inch circle. So once these are sandwiched in between our wafers of plywood, we'll have about a 1/2 inch to spare around the edges. Next trick's going to be cutting this out. And I've got something I'm going to try. Now here's how we're going to cut out our metal circles. I have traced the circle on here that I need to cut out, and I've moved a piece of sheet metal over toward the edge of my plywood here, so the plywood can give it a little bit more support, but I'm hanging over the edge just enough that I'm not hitting the plywood. I screwed this down and I put a metal blade on the jigsaw, and we're going to begin a cut and just rotate our piece of metal rather than rotating the saw. And it won't be perfect, but it'll do pretty good. There we go. I like it. All right. That will fit nicely inside our wood sandwich. And we're in business. Okay, need to cut a couple more of those, and then we'll start putting it all together. Okay, since I already know where the center is on these, because of the way that we drew our circle to begin with, and because of the fact that we'll need 5/8 hole here for the main bolt that goes through with the loop to hold these, I'm going to go ahead and pre-drill the wooden ones using the 5/8 spade bit. Okay. Okay, I do not recommend doing this with a spade bit. These are designed to drill wood. But again, the fact that it's 5/8 that I'm trying to go through, I do not have a regular 5/8 bit. I could probably find a way to punch the hole to make this work. But you can certainly ruin my spade bit. But okay, if we can get by with doing one more, we'll be in business. Okay, let's make a sandwich. I'm going to kind of dry fit all this first of all, make sure that it does what we want it to do. Don't we need these anymore? This old workmate table, by the way, is probably older than most of you who are watching this. Okay. This is kind of like a club sandwich. We have a piece of wood. We have a piece of metal. Another piece of wood. Another piece of metal. Another piece of wood. Metal. And we'll finish up with one more piece of wood. Okay, that's not terrible. All right, let's stick them all together. Okay, now I'm going to acknowledge that a good bit of what I'm about to do is almost certainly overkill, but I'm going to put some construction adhesive between each of these layers as I go, just to kind of give it a little something extra. Now, the reason I say it's overkill is that by the time we're done, we're not only going to have this one great big eye bolt in there, but there will be 1, 2, 3, 4, there will be 12 more half-inch nuts and bolts that hold the brackets that are going to support the legs, that are going to go all the way through our little pancake here. So, so certainly, when all is said and done, this adhesive will probably be excessive. But on the other hand, it can't really hurt, can it? I'm going to get some out here to the edges, just to kind of help hold for the wood pieces to have a nice something to hold them in place. How are we going to hold it together? Well, here's the plan. I'm going to run a few nice brawny screws into this, just to kind of pull it up nice and tight and hold it while that adhesive dries and while we work on getting the other bolts and things in place. The screws are longer than our disc is wide, so, rather than it is thick. So, that means that they are going to be sticking out. That's okay for now. I'm not planning on leaving them in there. Once everything else is there, there'll be no point in having those screws present at all. All right. We're on our way. Okay, now it might seem counterintuitive, but in order to make this jig or this pattern, this model, the first thing we're going to want to do is drill the hole that's going to hold our brackets in place. And I want that to be at the exact size that my bracket will, when it's put in place, will come right to the bottom of, well, in this case that's actually the top of the leg. So for these particular brackets, that happens to be 2 3/4 inches. So I made a mark in the center at 2 3/4. I'm going to drill it as perpendicular as I possibly can so that it's the same on both sides. Drill press might come in handy, but what I'm going to do to find where I want to cut out is I'm actually going to put my parts in here that I'm going to want to use. I'm going to use them to help me draw the arc that I want. Because as I said, what we're shooting for is we want for this to be, we want for the bottom of the board as it swivels to be constantly in touch or close to in touch with that top. So I'm going to start it right about there. Hold my pencil as steadily as I can. Mark off a little bit. That is all I should have to cut from this piece of wood. So we're going to do that with the jigsaw. I'm really not taking very much off of this, so if you happen to have a good sander, you could about sand that little corner. Probably get a cleaner job out of it, but I don't. So I'm going to attempt to cut it as cleanly as I can with a jigsaw. When I got out to the end, I went ahead and took a little swoop out, because I'd like there to be a little lip here to hold that in place for me. Okay, now we assemble these in a little fender, washer, a bracket, half-inch bolt, another fender washer, and then that's going to hold it all together. How we did. So what we're looking for here is for the flat part, unrounded part, to be right about even at the end of our brackets. And then as we swing our brackets, we want them all to pretty much follow the line of the bracket. Now right there you can see the little nubbin that I left out. I sort of want that to come in contact. That could be too much, but what the heck, we'll find out. Let's try it here. Here's our top. That part to be to the outside. We'll put it down. Can't go any further this way because it's meeting flush with the top. Swing it this way. Oh, I like that. Getting right there. That is pretty much the angle that we're going to drop. We're shooting for about a 30-degree angle from this vertical. And it's just a little chunk of wood there. Just a little piece that's sticking out some. So if we need to take it out farther than that, we can push it and let it go. But that right there is what we want our legs to look like. Now I'm going to use my one sample leg structure, leg assembly, to mark where I want to drill the holes for the bolts that are going to hold these brackets and the legs in place. So I've marked off equilateral distances around here. Right there is the center of this one. Put the bracket where I want it to be. Mark the hole. There's one. Right there's the next mark. There's two. Okay. 6 holes. Oh yeah, here's something else that I probably ought to point out. I had second thoughts about the screws that I put in this to hold this thing together yesterday. I had just grabbed some big 3-inch screws and ran them in, and they ended up sticking out about this much. That made it a little hard to lay this thing down flat different places, and also I didn't feel as if it was clamping these as good as I would have liked it to. So I ended up taking those out, found some 2-inch screws, actually about 1 3/4 screws, I believe, that I put in here to hold all of it together. And then, since I was losing light, I also called it a night last night and put a clamp on this to hold it together a little bit firmer while that adhesive held up. Now, as you'll see when we're done with what I'm about to do, there's going to be plenty holding this sandwich together. Now, I have 6 half-inch holes I need to drill. I'm drilling through 4 pieces of plywood and 3 pieces of sheet metal. I'm not going to use my half-inch spade drill. I got this big sucker, and I'll see how it does going all the way down through all these layers. There's the first metal. There's the second metal. And now I'm all the way out. Out nicely. Okay. There's one. Right to go. I'm going to go a little slower this time. going to attach our brackets. Just going to finger tighten these until we get the legs in place, and we'll tighten everything down. Now it's time to work on the legs, so we're really in the home stretch here. Before we do, though, I want to make a couple of observations, questions that I've seen, or different ways that people have done things that I'm maybe taking a little bit of a different approach to. First of all, what kind of 2x4 do you want to use? I've seen at least one video, and maybe more than one, where folks were using treated lumber. I don't really think that's necessary. In fact, unless you're planning on storing your tripod out in the weather, if you use treated lumber, you're really just going to add expense and weight to lug the thing around and not really gain anything in the mix. Regular lumber is exactly the same as far as strength goes as what pressure treated lumber is. The pressure treating, all it does is helps prevent rot and insect attack. It does not make it any stronger. So if you're thinking about that, like I said, unless you're planning on storing it out in the weather, no point whatsoever in using treated lumber. And if you do, you probably need to do something different than the plywood that you're making your lid out of. Thing number two, some people have talked about maybe using 4x4s for this, and I suppose that if you were looking to lift something considerably heavier than what I'm planning on lifting, you might look at that and think about it. However, my concern with that, again, is that you're really adding an awful lot of weight. It definitely would be a lot clumsier. You would probably need to make a little larger lid. I haven't thought of anything better to call that round disc top, so we'll just call it the lid for the time being. You'd need to make it a little bit bigger, and like I said, everything would end up being a little bit heavier. The final thing I'll say is that when you go to the lumber yard to pick out 2x4s, that's going to be tricky. It is hard to find really good, high-grade, 10-foot 2x4s. So you want to avoid as much as possible ones that have a lot of checks in them, that have visible knots, chipping, and I was not able to do that perfectly. I've got some that have a couple defects in them that I don't think are going to hurt their structural integrity, but it's something to be cognizant of before you start while you're shopping for your lumber. All right. right, we have our sample that we made, our jig, if you would, or whatever you choose to call it. And I'm going to align it with the end of this first board. Use it to draw that. I'm also going to try to go to the very center and make a mark, but I'm going to remeasure this just to make sure, because that hole is a critical measurement. And we're looking for 2 3/4. That looks like it's an 1/8 short to me. I'm going to move it back. As I said, I think that's a pretty important measurement to be sure that we get right. Measuring it down through the hole of that jig is not a terribly accurate way of doing it. Corner off with the jigsaw. Okay, there's one done. I need to do 2 more. All right, we're going to start attaching the legs to the bracket. All right, we'll tighten the other bolts. These we can go good and tight with. I left the other ones a little bit, well, not loose, but just snug to make sure that we didn't pinch the legs as we move them. But these are going to be helping to hold our pancake together, our club sandwich. Add our big heavy eye bolt. Okay, well, there you go. We've got the hard part done. There's one other little detail I'm going to do just kind of for the heck of recommended by our other YouTube friend that I'm going to link to, just as kind of an added safety measure. So we'll do that real quick. Won't take but a second. We'll just show it to you. This hoist is one that I ordered from Amazon. I'll put a link to the specific one. Seems to work well. We'll find out when we go out and grab something to lift. So, basically, this is what you need. We've got some lifting straps that we're going to use when we're working on the tombstones and things. It seems extremely sturdy. It feels as if it will support weight. We will obviously work carefully with it. You'll want to recheck this every time you use it. Make sure that you're not getting any cracks or weakness or anything of the sort. And pay close attention while you're hoisting. Okay, one last small detail that I'm going to add to this, more or less at the recommendation of our YouTube friend that I've mentioned, getting this general idea off of a couple times already. So I'm going to put some little mini eye bolts, 5/16 eye bolts, in toward the bottom of this. Now, I'm going to drill a 1/4 inch hole here, so it's not like I'm really doing anything that's going to weaken the structural soundness of this board. And the purpose of these little eye bolts, for one thing, it'll come in handy to put a bungee cord around it to kind of hold the legs together when we're traveling. The main purpose, though, and I may or may not end up doing this, the main purpose is to use a piece of chain around this that you can use to kind of hold the legs where you want them so that they don't flay out when it's under load. So, like I said, I may or may not do that. I haven't bought the pieces of chain to do it yet, but we'll do these. We'll put some little clips on them that you can use to attach the chain, really coming back from either the outside or the inside. And then we'll be done. So we'll drill 3 holes, stick 3 eye bolts in, and we'll have it done. I'm going to measure just so these are even. I think I'm going to put them up about 18 inches from the bottom. Okay, that goes there. We'll tighten that down on the other side, hold it in place. We'll put a little spring clip on each one that we will use to attach chain with. And that's about it. We'll do the same thing on each of the other 2 legs, and then that should be it. Okay, so that's it. If you wanted to get fancy with stuff, and I may yet, depending on what kind of mood I get into, put a coat of paint on that disc up there just because of the fact that it's plywood to kind of protect it a little bit more. But again, my intent is not to use this out in the weather, certainly not going to store it out in the weather. You could, if you wanted to get really anal, take a sander around the outside of that disc to make it a little bit more presentable. But again, this is something that we are trying to build that's functional, not decorative. And I think we've done it. I'm interested in taking it out in the cemetery and trying it out. you guys will have an opportunity to see that when the time comes, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, especially when we get into the cemetery and start doing repairs and cleanings and things like that. Be sure to tune in again. You can subscribe to this, you can like this. We'll be glad to catch you back next time. Thanks, everybody.